Thanks very much for that introduction. I am actually a GP. That's primarily what I would like to be known as, because I think a lot of what I'm going to say is very much related to what's been said already about how we actually make a difference of all these problems that seem to be insurmountable, like the obesity, the inequalities, the loneliness, the big disintegration of some of the cultures that we've got here. But also, as Deborah said, that people don't feel that positive aspect. They're starting to feel negative. And once you get that in a place, it's really hard to get it back. But as a GP and someone who works in communities, we get to see things. We haven't got all the answers, but we actually see real life and real people all the time. So what I'm just going to do is, just if I can get this up on here. Hopefully I can. So I want to take a slightly different angle in talking about green space. I'm going to talk a bit about physical activity. I have to do a little bit about the Beacon Street as well, because that brings it all together. But what I really want to try and do is to sort of say, how do we use the environment, and how do we get people engaged with all these problems, and do those fantastic parks and green spaces you've got already make a difference? Because most of the time people feel that's the little add-on, that's the nice to have. Let's get on with proper medicine, let's get on with proper diabetes care and prevention of smoking and alcohol, and let's deal with each of those individually and put budgets against them and try and sort it out. And then we find we're just not getting any progress because the numbers are small. So this is a new way of thinking, and hopefully I'll take you through it. Basically, we are hunter-gatherers, I'm afraid. We might be in a nice hall here, we're going to have a nice sort of coffee, we've got clothes on, and we all look very respectable. But deep down in our DNA, we are a hunter-gatherer. And if we just try and look at the perspective of this, 10,000 years, 100,000 years ago, up until now, is about the time where our brain really hasn't changed very much at all. So this is actually where a human being has stopped evolving much in that 100,000 years. Some say it's about 200,000 years. Now, it's much easier to think of that in an hour for every 1,000 years. So that's 100 hours, and that's 4 days. So go back 4 days and pretend you've been given a remit to build an IT software, okay, to make something happen. So you've got 4 days to do it. So 4 days ago, all the way to 10 hours ago, we were brilliant hunter-gatherers. Every generation has got better and better and better at it. And that's how our bodies were designed, right through to the brain and all our muscles, etc. And then 10 hours ago, we started just the first signs of agriculture. And then about 4 hours ago, we were living in cities. But most people were still way outside doing lots of the kind of hunter-gathering and being outdoors. And then industrialization came. And in that 4 days, that's 9 minutes ago. So in 9 minutes, things have changed. And actually, it's the last 80 seconds when technology's come on board that our bodies have completely had to adapt to a new environment. We're indoors a lot, we're inactive. So you building an IT software, you're suddenly told with 80 seconds to go, you've got to change it all. You've got to change everything. Everything you've been doing in the last 4 days, you've got to change to a completely new system. And of course you can't do it. So unfortunately, our bodies can't adapt to the new place. We're the wrong body for the place we're in at the moment. So we have to be a bit smarter and think, we've got to think that what would be our bodies designed to be? What actually do we need to be in order to be at our best? Well, lots of ways are being developed, like the Wellbeing for Health, which are 5 ways for well-being, which is out there. A lot of the Marmot talks about education and a good start in life. And so lots of kind of people have described how it is to get good well-being. And actually you can pretty much put it into 3 areas. And it fits in perfectly with what we've just heard already. So the first thing, we're social. We're social animals. And when we're isolated, the cardiovascular risk, it's the same as smoking. Loneliness and smoking are identical risk factors for heart disease. That's not isolation, because some people choose to be isolated. Loneliness can sometimes be in a big area where there are lots of people around. Loneliness is a perception that you're not looked after, you're not cared for, you're on your own. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the place, and we're going to talk about that a lot. If you have a hostile environment, or perceived to be hostile, we actually go into stress mode. because we don't see the green trees, we don't see the water, we don't see what we have been programmed to feel as a hunter-gatherer. And I'm afraid our brains are still hardwired to be that hunter-gatherer. And I can give you reams of evidence on how the brain works when we see green space, but I'm going to touch on it a bit later. And the third thing is purpose. So if you're unemployed, if you've got no hobbies, if you've got no voluntary work, if you don't feel you've got any use in life, if you don't feel you're valued, actually that is a major, major problem. We know unemployment is huge risk factors for long-term conditions. Look at the society we've got, and you see those three things in big, big problems. We have loneliness, as we've just heard. We've got environments that aren't fit for purpose, and we have people who are feeling completely disorientated, undervalued, and depressed, and not wanting to go forward. So let's look at the middle one, because that's what I'm here to talk about. So, for place, we can change environments in a town centre to get more pedestrianisation, and that has been shown to be positive. It gets more people connected, it gets people walking and physical activity. But what about the parks? What about the green spaces? What about planting trees? Does that make a difference? Well, there's a lot of evidence that show it does. So I'm going to touch on two things where the evidence is there, but I could, doing this book, I'm finding that there is so much from the top universities around the world now, big departments are now studying this area. So here we are, 4 slides here. People were given the task to look at those slides, and they were either given the top ones, or they were given the bottom ones. And if they were given the bottom ones, either the bottom one was for a microsecond, the green trees flashed and then they disappeared, so it was subliminal, you couldn't actually see it, but your brain would have seen it, but your conscience wouldn't have registered it. Or they were given the trees and they were just given the trees and nothing else. Or they were given the trees and they were explained about what the trees were and what the wildlife it supported and what type of tree and where it came from. So a little bit more information about those trees. There are 4 groups. No trees, trees in a flash, trees just there, trees explained and understood. And then they did that really horrible test to work out your concentration, where you had to subtract 13 all the time from 500. And I think I would struggle probably at about 400 from whatever it is. But this is what people had to do. So the backward test has recognised concentration of people. So let's have a look at how the 4 groups compared. And this has been repeated in many, many experiments. With no trees, they actually did worse than when they started the control. So looking at an urban environment with no trees created a little bit of a stress, and that little bit of stress meant that concentration was impaired. Strangely enough, that one of the subliminal tree actually made their performance improved to the same point as people who actually saw the trees just there. So deep in our subconscious, we already start to make that connection. And then finally, those who explained about the trees, they did the best, because suddenly it fell into context. Let's have a look at another study done in the States, this one. And they just wanted to look, they compared everybody with like. So these weren't just people living in leafy suburbs are going to be richer than those people living in a poor environment. They compare like with like. And they wanted to see whether the trees or the natural environment from satellite made a difference to people's well-being. And again, this has been repeated in Holland, in Germany, in a lot more in the States, in Australia, in the UK. And what it shows that where there was 25% more tree cover, depression and stress reduced, like for like. And of course, this is where the statisticians have to get very, very strict to make sure you're not comparing people in suburban and urban environments. But basically, the stress part is a bit I really want to focus on. Of course, depression is important, and that is a major problem, and it's an ongoing effect of stress. Children who've been exposed to green space, like for like again, those who've had more green space interaction actually cope better with stresses in their lives compared to those children who don't have that contact with green space. So here we go, on the left-hand side is the psychological stress of the child, measured by a whole lot of instruments on that. And here is the children divided into 3 groups. Those who've had low stress in their life, and those who've had really horrible life. of bullying, of domestic violence, or being perhaps in foster care where it's all gone wrong, or whatever the stresses they've actually measured. And what they found, that the more stresses those children had, the more the natural environment looked after them, the more the gap was reduced. What about life expectancy? Well, this was a study of pretty much the whole of England, where they mapped it out, and again they did like for like, making sure the economics was fine. And they tried to find out whether green space made a difference. So this is a high-income group. Wellbeing, exposure to green, very green to no green. Life expectancy, which is on that left-hand side, it's pretty flat. This is a middle-income group, and you can see here that it starts to drop down. So those with little green have a higher death rate than those who've got a lot of green. The poverty, those who live in poverty, a much steeper decline. But just look at talking about health inequalities. The gap here between the rich and the poor of life expectancy has been squashed compared to the gap here where the environment has been hostile and it hasn't been right. And the blip at the end where it's sort of gone down again is deep in urban environments. Actually, it can be very peaceful, no cars, etc., and it can actually be like an anomaly. In the States, it didn't work out because suburban people live in trees, but they have to drive everywhere. So they actually have a decline. But what this shows is that dealing with health inequalities, we mustn't forget the environment. It's doing it for us. The mayor of Chicago, they've got 35 million trees now. They've planted over 1 million trees in the last 20 years because of this research and other research about it to try and sort things out. So we've got these three things: people, purpose, place. They're going all wrong. We're alienating ourselves from what our body was designed to be. So what's happening in our body? What's actually going on in our body? Well, let's pick out one thing: visceral fat. Fat is bad. We all know that, obesity, etc. But is it really bad? Actually, there's some evidence to show that people who are overweight with the right proportion of fat actually live longer than those who've got normal weight. Lots of research now questioning this whole obesity thing on its own. But what we do know is that if you have visceral fat, that's the fat in the tummy, then you're much worse off. And there are three things that create visceral fat: inactivity, eating, and stress. Stress lays down visceral fat much quicker than it does other fat. And in fact, it converts fat to visceral fat. So the fat around your organs is really, really bad news. It's toxic, it gives off lots of inflammation, it creates the bedrock of almost all long-term conditions. So that's there it is. This is ghastly stuff. There it is. All nestling inside your organs, wrapping around your gut, your heart, and your liver. That person hasn't got very much. Normally, waist circumference is a better measure than BMI, but in this case it's even unfair because they've all got the same waist circumference. So even then you sometimes can't tell. So someone goes for exercise, lots of exercise to lose weight. They come back to the doctor or the nurse saying, "This is rubbish, I've not lost any weight." But what they would have done is they would have lost that visceral fat. Because this is patients with type 2 diabetes, visceral fat has plummeted when they just did walking with no loss of weight. And even with the lean person, the visceral fat was selectively reduced when he became active. So physical activity targets the more dangerous fat, and you may not even lose weight because you're going to put a bit more muscle on. So we mustn't use weight loss anymore as our sole indicator of health, particularly when we're dealing with physical activity. We've got to use a bigger picture of that person, of how they're dealing with, how they've gone out to see friends, how they're actually now taking up sport and going out into green environments. But we know that chronic stress creates physical inactivity as well, because you're tired all the time when you're chronically stressed. So you get those people now where everything's gone wrong because they're not connected to where they used to be, where our bodies were designed to be. That creates this chronic stress and actually makes you tired all the time. TATT, as we call it in general practice, and it creates inactivity. The body's wanting to conserve energy. It doesn't know what's going on. Something's bad is about to happen, it feels. So it's in a crisis mode. So it holds back. So you feel tired. You haven't got the energy anymore. And quickly on the physical activity, I know Dean's going to be talking a lot more about it. But if you are inactive, then risk of 18% of breast cancer in the UK is caused by inactivities. About the same for colon cancer, type 2. But look at the places where they've got activity, where they actually do things differently, like in the Netherlands. Only 4% of breast cancer deaths, only 4% of colon cancer deaths are caused by inactivity. So they've reduced their cancer, not because of interventions or screening, but because they've just got people more active, or they've reduced some of the stress. And if I look in general practice, everything I'm doing, this is death rate, percentage of deaths caused by whatever it is. So high blood pressure, really important. 16% of deaths are caused by high blood pressure in men, particularly. High cholesterol diabetes, about 4%. Smoking, depending what the rate is, about 8%. Obesity, about 3%. What's that thing on the end? That massive, great big one? Fitness or physical activity. So all the things I do in general practice, physical activity is a little bit of at the end of the consultation. It should be the number one thing I start with, I do in the middle, and I finish with. But we're measured by all these other things here. Not that they aren't important. We've got to do this well, we've got to do this well, we've got to do all of these things really, really well. But what you must remember is the big elephant in the room is inactivity. And there's a big debate about inactivity and obesity there. There is a connection between the two where obesity is a marker of inactivity because they think inactivity may be more important. In fact, it's twice as many deaths caused by inactivity than obesity. So, let's have a think. We're in the wrong body for the wrong environment. We have to convert ourselves now to thinking we're much more sociable, we're much more in a better environment, and we have purpose and value in our lives. And what happens if we get it wrong? Let me give you a 4-minute science lesson. So you have to hang on, I'm afraid, but everyone will get this. I normally have to repeat it for GPs. Normally, for most audiences, they get it first time. I always find GPs have to repeat it because they think it's far too complicated because they kind of overanalyze it. So that's a cell. We've got lots of those. And inside are little green things called mitochondria. Those mitochondria are the batteries. There used to be a free-living little organism that used to swim around on its own, and it popped inside a cell one day about 1 billion years ago, and that's how life started. And we all carry exactly the same energy mechanism than any other living species in the entire universe, from a slug to an oak tree to a snail to anything else. We all use mitochondria. So we're not really special at all. Mitochondria work very well by generating electricity, and that electricity converts them to chemicals which actually change and drive all our energy, everything we do. Absolutely every part of energy that comes from us comes from these mitochondria. So what it does is it makes the potential difference of electricity between the inner and the outer membrane. So it charges up. So there it is, it's ready. It's a battery charged up. Your mobile phone is now charged up, you're ready to use it. Not much action going on here. It's still charged up. It's waiting you to do something. It wants you to do something. We're designed to be on the move all the time, but we're not. We're sitting there 8 hours sometimes, 12 hours, some of you, sitting at your laptops and your computers and doing emails. What happens when you're doing that? Well, you start to release free radicals. These are the electrons. It can't hold that charge anymore. It's really desperate to it. It can't do it anymore. So these free radicals come out, electrons leaking like a big dam held up, and you've got water trickling out of it because you can't hold it. And that actually starts to cause damage. And those free radicals start to go out and cause damage in the environment. I'll explain what happens when they go out of the cell. Okay, if you all got up and you started walking around, that charge will drop. And as soon as that charge drops, no more free radicals. The potential difference has dropped. It gets charged back up again, and it waits for the same process again. And if it's not used anymore, you start to get free radicals. So your mitochondria is like a dynamo. It just needs to be moving all the time. That's how we were designed. Those free radicals go out of the mitochondria, that big sluggy thing is the mitochondria, and they hit the end of the chromosomes. Chromosomes divide. They have to divide every time the cell, so we're constantly regenerating. But if we hit the end of those chromosomes, called the telomeres, which those free radicals go for, and destroy them, then as those telomeres get shorter and shorter, it goes from a healthy cell to a cell that can't divide anymore. It becomes toxic. It's sitting there as a cell, not dead, but not alive, not able to divide. And that means that cell is now being called senescence, which means it's the end of its life, but it's going to give out loads of inflammatory markers. And all those inflammatory markers go and hit our brain, dementia, anxiety and depression, our heart and vessels, stroke, heart disease. It goes into our liver and our muscles, diabetes, into our joints, arthritis. Every single long-term condition is an inflammatory disease. And it's all because we've created the problems there of these free radicals, because we're not moving around. And what's interesting is that stress and overeating both increase the amount of free radicals coming out. So let's summarise what we've got here. We've got the people, purpose, place. That creates, if we get it right, it's resilience. If we haven't got that resilience, then we start getting chronic stress. We get poor health behaviour. If you're stressed, you drink, you smoke, you take all the wrong things, and you become inactive, and you eat sugar and fat. That causes mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, telomere shortening, and that causes all long-term conditions. So I kind of clean up here as a GP, and the rest of the CCD is desperately trying to deal with all of this. Millions, billions goes into this. Public health is trying to deal with changing behaviour, and the council and public health, and all of us, should be dealing with the top, because that's where it's all going to work. That's where the main effect is going to be. We can try and do it all on the bottom, but we're clearing up constant mess which we've created. We've got to remember we are hunter-gatherers, I'm afraid. So what can we do about it? Well, some things I've been involved with, we can go get people walking. Well, walking gets rid of all those inflammatory conditions. Think of all those mitochondria. Just going for a walk, it doesn't sound very techy, doesn't sound very scientific, doesn't sound very kind of white coats and stainless steel and expensive drugs and expensive equipment, but it's doing as much to your mitochondria and your free radicals than any medical intervention will ever do. Green gym, that gets people out into the natural environment, creates a better environment for more people to enjoy. So those green spaces or those neglected areas of Dudley could be improved because volunteers come out, and not only do they get their well-being and their physical activity, but they create a place for other people. And this is what TCB are doing. And very quickly on that, we had one person, and we did a study on a few of the people, and we said, okay, go to the green gym, go to aerobics, tell us what you feel. So they went to the green gym and wore a polar heart monitor, they went to aerobics and they put a heart monitor on. And they had a tool talk about how to use up axles and big blades and everything else like that, or in aerobics it's a kind of warm-up. Then you do your cardiovascular training zone heart rate. And then the green gym actually went off the graph, it went on for 3 hours. Aerobics started to have a cool down, in an hour they finished. But what do they talk about? For the aerobics, it's all about their body, about the muscles they've improved, their heart, their lungs, everything about their own body and how they'd improved it. But the green gym is everything they've done for the environment, for the wildlife, for the people they've met, the weather that it was all external. Who did the best? The person in the green gym. They did by far more activity, and yet that was a hidden benefit. Health wasn't mentioned, but actually you got much more health because they were engaged and they were dealing with those 3 big problems: people, purpose and place. I'm going to move on from that one. I'm going to just mention this because we have to get really big numbers to change. And I think if we're going to make a big difference, then what we have to try and do is to get people engaged in a game or something they enjoy and tuck in health and tuck in those physical activity messages underneath it. So they're not overt. If I tell a patient to get walking because they won't get diabetes or a heart attack or dementia later on in life, they won't. Because most people are going to be thinking about what's going to happen in 30 years' time. Most people are wondering about their bills tomorrow or how they're going to deal with their shopping tomorrow and all the problems they've got. So something has to engage them. I sometimes use the example of Bob. Bob lives in Liverpool and you tell him to go one stop short on his bus stop, you tell him to go up the stairs, you tell him to get on his bike, and all these messages. Bob doesn't care less. He's 48, diabetes, depressed, lives in the 14th floor of a tower block. But get him to go to walk to Anfield to watch Liverpool, and he'll do 3 miles there and 3 miles back, and he won't even think about it. That wasn't health for him. That's what he's always done. So we've got to think that actually physical activity and health behaviour is a means to an end, and it's the end we have to understand in people's lives. What is it that they really value? Because actually not having a heart attack is not what people value. Not having diabetes, they don't want those labels on them. So with Beat Street, what we've been doing, we get about 15% of the entire population. In Hertfordshire, we've just got 40,000 people engaged in 2 weeks. Reading just got 28,000 in about 3 weeks. We make a game, we use primary schools as a means, as the beginning. 90 to 100% of all primary schools normally take it up. We give cards out to every child, and every child takes cards back to their parents, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their neighbours. And the children are the ones who drive things forward. They're the ones who understand it. They take their parents for a walk. They take their parents out for a bike ride because they want to get points at their school. And so do the parents, so do the teachers, and the headmasters, I can assure you. It gets very, very competitive. So by getting people to Beat Street, we do more than that. We've now got 28,000 people who are constantly working with their cars, trying to touch them on these beat boxes, which are RFID readers. So let's take them to the parks. Let's take them to the riversides. And wherever we put new beat boxes with double points, we will get 1,000 families turning up in that afternoon. Health is not mentioned. Physical activity is not mentioned. But doing something for your child is the thing that resonates in people, and therefore they will do, and they did 300,000 miles. And 17% who are totally inactive dropped off completely. And at the other end, we got about 18% increase. So what we have to try and do now is to think differently, which you are already very much well on the way here in Dudley. Some areas are really not quite getting this, but here you're miles ahead. We know that long-term conditions, and particularly unplanned hospital admissions, are likely to cause major catastrophe in our budgets. And the NHS can't deal with it. The NHS is good at the stuff at the bottom, that chart, but really not very good at the stuff at the top. The NHS has got to think about how to deal with that top part. The natural environment is our natural habitat. That's what we were designed to be. Now, I'm not going back into building wigwams and caves and things like that. We live as we do. But we have to remind ourselves that we connect to each other, we connect to the environment, and we give each other purpose. And therefore we have to think that way when we look at the planning of new healthcare, where the investment goes in. Use volunteers, use what drives people. Children's primary schools and the leaderboard and prizes gets 20% of the entire population more active and going. That's the kind of thing we have to think of. It may not be that, it may be other things. And the environment we've got, if we just planted trees like we did in Chicago, it made a massive difference. There was less domestic violence, there was less bullying in playgrounds at school, there was less diabetes, there was less anxiety, more people connected to each other. So it made a massive difference simply by planting trees in very difficult urban areas. So it can be done. So I'll leave you with a quote which is very, very clear. It's an Icelandic one, but basically we are part of the environment. We can talk about the science and we can talk about everything else, but in the end, we just have to connect to each other. We have to connect to the world, which we're part of, and we've just got to give each other that respect so we have some purpose. Thanks very much.